It was early September 1942. The Kokoda track cut through some of the most unforgiving terrain on Earth. Steep ridges rose sharply from narrow valleys. Thick rainforests blocked the sun. Constant rain turned the path into mud. Australian forces had been retreating for weeks. Japanese troops pressed south, aiming for Port Moresby. The 21st Brigade held a defensive line at Mission Ridge and Brigade Hill. The fresh 227th Battalion occupied the forward position on Mission Ridge. On 6th of September, the battalion dug in. Men from South Australia, many in their 20s, prepared for the fight ahead. They had arrived in New Guinea only weeks earlier. Veterans of the Syria campaign, they were considered among the best in the Australian Imperial Force. Lieutenant Colonel Geoffrey Cooper commanded them. He positioned companies along the ridge. Visibility was limited to a few yards in the kunai grass and jungle. Japanese artillery began shelling on 7th of September. Mountain guns fired from positions north of Afogi. Shells exploded among the Australian defenses. The 227ths held firm. Soldiers fired rifles and Bren guns down the slope. Grenades answered Japanese probes. By evening, ammunition ran low. One company expended hundreds of rounds and over 1,000 grenades. Unknown to the Australians, a Japanese battalion slipped through the jungle during the night. Guided by local knowledge, they followed a creek line west of the ridge. They reached the main track behind the Australian positions. Brigade headquarters lay exposed. Confusion spread on 8th of September. Gunfire echoed from the rear. Radio messages became garbled due to the terrain. Orders arrived for parts of the brigade to withdraw south. The 214th and 2th/16th battalions fought their way back along the track. For the 227th, the situation worsened. Japanese forces blocked the path south. The battalion faced attack from front and rear. Cooper made the decision. Rather than risk annihilation, he ordered the unit to abandon the ridge. They would move off the track, heading east across Brigade Hill into parallel ridges. Companies assembled in the mist. Wounded men were placed on stretchers. Limited rations were distributed. The battalion vanished into the jungle. No further contact reached headquarters. Brigadier Arnold Potts, commanding the 21st Brigade, reported the 227th missing. Higher command in Port Moresby assumed heavy losses. The Kokoda campaign was at its critical point. Japanese forces seemed unstoppable. The loss of an entire battalion threatened the defense of Port Moresby. Days passed with no news. Patrols searched the area around Brigade Hill. Abandoned Australian equipment was found. Japanese troops occupied the ridge. Historians later described this as the moment the 227th became the lost battalion. Yet the men were alive. They pushed through dense undergrowth. No tracks guided them. Machetes cleared paths. Rain fell relentlessly. Uniforms rotted. Boots wore out. Malaria and dysentery spread. Food ran out quickly. Soldiers ate roots and leaves. They boiled water from streams. Japanese search parties combed the area. Small clashes occurred. The Australians avoided main forces. Leadership held the unit together. Officers and NCOs encouraged the men. Mates helped each other. The ordeal lasted weeks. Strength ebbed. Some men collapsed from exhaustion. Finally, on 25th of September, advanced elements reached friendly lines near Jarir. The main body followed. Survivors numbered about 300. Many required hospital treatment. The battalion had lost effectiveness for further fighting. This disappearance highlighted the dangers of the Owen Stanley jungle. Terrain isolated units as effectively as enemy action. The story of the 227th stands as a testament to endurance. Ordinary soldiers faced extraordinary hardship. Their fate remained unknown for nearly 3 weeks. It contributed to the legend of lost units on Kokoda. But events leading to this moment began months earlier. The story of the 227th Battalion begins in South Australia, in the early months of the Second World War. Australia had entered the conflict in September 1939. By mid-1940, the government called for volunteers to form a second Australian Imperial Force. Men from Adelaide and surrounding towns answered the call. Farmers, laborers, clerks, and teachers enlisted. They gathered at Woodside Camp in the Adelaide Hills. There, in May 1940, the 227th Infantry Battalion came into being. The battalion formed part of the 21st Brigade within the 7th Division. Lieutenant Colonel Murray Moulton took initial command. Training was rigorous. Recruits learned infantry tactics, weapons handling, and field discipline. Australia faced threats in multiple theaters. The 7th Division prepared for overseas service. In April 1941, the 227th sailed for the Middle East. They arrived in Palestine amid the ongoing North African campaign. The battalion saw its first action in the Syria-Lebanon campaign. In June 1941, Australian forces advanced against Vichy French troops. The 227th fought in mountainous terrain near the Litani River. They captured key positions despite strong resistance. Casualties were light compared to later battles. The men gained valuable combat experience. They learned to operate in difficult country. Cooperation with artillery and armor became familiar. After the Syrian armistice, the battalion moved to defensive positions. Life in the Middle East included long periods of garrison duty. Training continued. The men adapted to desert conditions. By early 1942, the war shifted dramatically. Japan entered the conflict in December 1941. Singapore fell in February. Darwin was bombed. Australia now faced direct threat from the north. The government recalled veteran divisions from the Middle East. The 7th Division, including the 227th, sailed home in March 1942. The men arrived in Adelaide to a warm welcome. Brief leave followed. Reorganization began quickly. The battalion received new equipment. Tropical uniforms replaced desert gear. Training focused on jungle warfare. Intelligence reports warned of likely fighting in New Guinea. Command changed hands. Lieutenant Colonel Jeffrey Cooper assumed leadership in July 1942. A regular officer, Cooper brought steady authority. His experience prepared the unit for the challenges ahead. Events moved rapidly. Japanese forces landed on the northern coast of Papua in July 1942. They advanced over the Owen Stanley Range along the Kokoda Track. Their objective was Port Moresby, the key Allied base. Militia battalions, mainly the 39th from Victoria, met the initial invasion. They were young and undertrained. Reinforcements were urgently needed. The 21st Brigade, including the 227th, received orders to deploy. The battalion flew from Australia to Port Moresby in late August 1942. Conditions in the capital were basic. Heat, dust, and malaria greeted the arrivals. Supplies remained limited. From Port Moresby, the men marched overland to the northern side of the range. Native carriers, known as Papuans, assisted with loads. The journey took days. Altitude increased steadily. The air grew cooler and wetter. The 21st Brigade, under Brigadier Arnold Potts, joined Maroubra Force. This composite command defended the track. The 39th Battalion had already suffered heavily at Isarava. Veteran troops were vital to hold the line. The operational environment was unlike anything the men had faced. Dense rainforest covered steep ridges. Visibility rarely exceeded 20 yards. Rain fell almost daily. Mud clung to boots and equipment. The single narrow track formed the only route forward. All supplies moved along it. Airdrops supplemented carrier lines. Radio communication proved unreliable in the valleys and under heavy canopy. Malaria and dysentery spread quickly. Medical evacuation depended on stretcher bearers. Casualties often took days to reach aid posts. The terrain itself became an enemy. Japanese forces, the South Seas Detachment under Major General Tomitaro Hirai, advanced confidently. They were battle-hardened from Malaya and the Philippines. Local knowledge helped their movement. Supply lines stretched but held. The broader campaign aimed to protect Australia. Port Moresby controlled sea routes to the north. Its loss would expose Queensland to invasion. Allied commanders, led by General Douglas MacArthur, prioritized its defense. General Sir Thomas Blamey commanded Australian land forces. He directed reinforcements forward. The 7th Division prepared to follow the 21st Brigade. Time remained critical. The 227th Battalion arrived at the front in late August. They relieved exhausted militia units. Morale was high despite the conditions. The men believed their experience would turn the tide. Training in Australia had included jungle exercises. Yet nothing fully prepared them for the Owen Stanleys. Physical demands were extreme. Packs weighed over 60 pounds. Movement uphill exhausted even fit soldiers. Logistics depended heavily on Papuan carriers. These local men carried ammunition, food, and medical supplies. Their loyalty and endurance earned deep respect. Australians later called them the Fuzzy Wuzzy Angels. Commanders briefed the battalion on the situation. Japanese strength was estimated at several thousand. Australian forces numbered fewer. Delaying actions were the immediate goal. The plan called for defense in depth. Positions on ridges allowed observation and fire down the track. Withdrawal would occur only under pressure. Each day gained allowed more reinforcements to arrive. Lieutenant Colonel Cooper positioned his companies carefully. Headquarters coordinated with flanking battalions. Patrols probed forward to gain information. Contact with the enemy grew closer. The men dug weapon pits in hard ground. Camouflage became essential. Rations consisted of bully beef and hard biscuits. Water came from streams, treated when possible. Medical officers warned of disease. Quinine tablets were issued daily. Mosquito nets offered limited protection. Fatigue compounded health risks. By early September, the battalion occupied positions around a fogey. The track wound south through narrow spurs. Brigade headquarters directed operations from nearby. The larger offensive continued. Japanese pressure mounted daily. Australian commanders knew the coming battles would test the fresh troops severely. The 227th stood ready. Veterans of Syria now faced a different war. Jungle replaced desert. A determined enemy replaced a reluctant one. Yet the soldiers maintained discipline. Mateship sustained them. Letters from home arrived irregularly. Thoughts of family motivated endurance. The campaign's outcome remained uncertain. Every position held bought precious time. Port Moresby lay only weeks away for an unopposed advance. The men of the 227th prepared for their part. They little imagined the ordeal ahead. Isolation and hardship would push them to the limit. But in those first days of September 1942, the battalion moved into line with quiet confidence. Events were about to test that confidence in ways no training could foresee. The 227th Battalion reached the Kokoda track in late August 1942. They moved forward to relieve the exhausted 39th Militia Battalion. The veterans stepped into positions around Isarava. Rain fell steadily. Mud covered everything. On 26th of August, the battalion deployed along a narrow ridge. Lieutenant Colonel Jeffrey Cooper placed his companies in depth. A company held the forward slope. B and C companies supported from higher ground. D Company remained in reserve. The terrain restricted movement. Thick jungle grew on both flanks. The track ran like a muddy trench through the center. Visibility was poor. Soldiers could see only a few yards ahead. Japanese forces approached from the north. Scouts reported contact on 27th of August. Small patrols clashed in the undergrowth. Australian Bren guns opened fire. The enemy withdrew temporarily. That afternoon, heavier attacks began. Japanese infantry advanced in waves. They used mortars and mountain guns. Shells burst among the Australian positions. Men hugged the ground in shallow pits. The 227ths held their line. Rifles and light machine guns answered the assaults. Grenades rolled down the slope. Casualties mounted on both sides. Medical orderlies moved forward under fire. By evening, ammunition supplies dwindled. Carriers brought forward fresh boxes. Papuan men struggled up the steep track. Their efforts kept the defense going. Night brought no relief. Japanese soldiers infiltrated close to the positions. Shouts and bursts of fire echoed in the darkness. Australians threw grenades at shadows. Sleep was impossible. On 28th of August, the fighting intensified. The 214th Battalion, on the left flank, bore the brunt. The 227th supported with fire. Cooper sent patrols to locate enemy concentrations. Terrain complicated every action. Steep drops fell away from the ridge. Dense vines tangled legs. Men carried heavy packs. Sweat mixed with rain on their faces. Communications relied on field telephones and runners. Radio sets struggled in the deep valleys. Messages took hours to reach brigade headquarters. Decisions often lagged behind events. Logistics remained critical. All food and ammunition came over the track. Airdrops attempted resupply. Parachutes sometimes caught in tall trees. Carriers retrieved what they could. Malaria cases increased daily. Men shivered with fever in their pits. Quinine tablets offered limited protection. Dysentery weakened many soldiers. Evacuation down the track took days. By 29th of August, pressure grew unbearable at Isarava. Japanese flanking moves threatened the position. Brigadier Potts ordered a withdrawal south. The battalions prepared to pull back. The 227ths covered the movement. Rearguard actions delayed the enemy. Small groups fought fierce engagements. Every hour gained allowed organized retreat. On 30th of August, the battalion reached Rest House, further south. They dug in again. Exhausted men collapsed beside their weapons. Rations were short. Bully beef and biscuits formed the main diet. Japanese pursuit continued. Probing attacks tested the new line. Australian artillery, limited as it was, fired in support. Shells whistled overhead from positions near Aora Creek. Cooper reorganized his companies. Casualties had reduced strength. Reinforcements were not yet available. The men knew they must hold longer. Early September brought movement south again. The brigade withdrew toward Afogi. The 227ths marched in column. Mud sucked at boots. Wounded men leaned on comrades. On 4th of September, the battalion reached Mission Ridge. The position overlooked the track south. Brigade Hill lay nearby. Potts planned a strong defense here. Cooper positioned the 227ths on Mission Ridge itself. The ridge formed a narrow spur. Kunai grass covered the crest. Jungle crowded both sides. Companies dug weapon pits in rocky soil. Camouflage nets hid positions. Patrols moved forward daily. Contact reports confirmed Japanese advance. The men worked tirelessly. Picks and shovels rang against stone. Sweat poured despite the cool altitude. Rations remained basic. Water came from local streams. Radio logs recorded increasing enemy strength. Japanese battalions closed rapidly. Their supply lines functioned better over familiar ground. Morale stayed high among them. Australian commanders faced difficult choices. Reinforcements from the 25th Brigade were still marching north. Time was running out. Every position had to count. On 6th of September, the battalion stood ready. Men cleaned rifles and checked ammunition. Officers briefed sections on likely attacks. The ridge offered good fields of fire. Japanese artillery opened fire that morning. Shells exploded along the Australian line. Smoke and earth filled the air. Men crouched low in their pits. Infantry assaults followed quickly. Waves of soldiers advanced up the slope. Australian machine guns swept the approaches. Bodies fell in the kunai grass. The 227ths repelled repeated attacks. Ammunition expenditure was heavy. One company fired over 1,000 grenades. Bren guns glowed red from constant use. By afternoon, pressure shifted to flanking battalions. The 214ths and 2th/16th reported heavy fighting. Japanese forces probed weaknesses in the line. Cooper maintained contact with headquarters. Runners carried messages across the ridge. Telephone lines stretched thinly. Updates arrived slowly. Night fell on 6th of September with the position still held. Fires burned quietly under ponchos. Men ate cold rations. Guards watched the darkness. On 7th of September, attacks resumed at dawn. Japanese mountain guns pounded the ridge. Shell bursts shook the ground. Splinters wounded several men. Australian counter-fire answered when possible. Mortar teams dropped bombs on enemy assembly areas. Observation posts directed the shoots. Throughout the day, infantry clashes continued. Japanese soldiers reached close to the forward pits. Hand-to-hand fighting occurred in places. Bayonets and grenades decided local actions. Casualties rose steadily. Stretcher bearers carried wounded to the rear. The regimental aid post worked constantly. Morphine eased pain for serious cases. By dusk, ammunition reserves ran critically low. Carriers brought forward limited supplies. Darkness halted major attacks. Both sides prepared for the next day. Radio traffic increased that evening. Reports indicated Japanese movement around the flanks. Scouts confirmed enemy troops west of the ridge. Brigade headquarters discussed withdrawal plans. The position might become untenable. Orders prepared for possible movement south. The men of the 227ths rested as best they could. Exhaustion showed on every face. Uniforms hung soaked and torn. Boots wore through at the soles. Yet discipline held. Officers and NCOs moved among the pits. Encouragement passed quietly. Mateship sustained the battalion. The morning of 8th of September would bring decisive change. Japanese forces had completed their encirclement during the night. Events were about to shift rapidly. On the morning of September 8, 1942, the situation on Mission Ridge and Brigade Hill deteriorated rapidly. Japanese forces launched coordinated assaults at dawn. Mountain guns shelled Australian positions. Infantry advanced from multiple directions. The 214th and 2th/16th battalions, positioned on Brigade Hill proper, faced intense pressure. Reports reached Lieutenant Colonel Jeffrey Cooper that enemy troops had gained ground on the left flank. Gunfire echoed from the rear of the brigade position. By mid-morning, radio messages confirmed the worst. A Japanese battalion had moved undetected along a creek line west of the ridge during the night. They now blocked the main Kokoda track south of Brigade Hill. The withdrawal route was cut. Brigadier Potts issued urgent orders. Surviving elements of the 214th and 2th/16th were to fight their way south along the track. Heavy casualties made organized movement difficult. Small groups broke contact and headed into the jungle. For the 227th on Mission Ridge, the picture grew grim. Japanese infantry pressed from the north. At the same time, fire came from the direction of brigade headquarters. The battalion was effectively surrounded. Cooper gathered his company commanders. Options were limited. Surrender was not considered. A direct breakout south along the track risked annihilation. The dense jungle to the east offered the only alternative. Around noon, Cooper gave the order. The battalion would abandon Mission Ridge. They would move off the track, crossing Brigade Hill and heading into parallel ridges. The aim was to bypass the Japanese roadblock and rejoin Australian forces further south. Companies assembled quickly. Wounded men were placed on improvised stretchers. Limited ammunition and rations were distributed. Personal gear was discarded to lighten loads. Men carried only weapons, basic supplies, and essential medical items. The move began in the early afternoon. A company led the way eastward. Thick undergrowth slowed progress. Machetes hacked at vines and lawyer cane. Rain began again, turning the ground slippery. No clear path existed. The men followed ridge lines where possible. Steep gullies forced detours. Visibility remained poor. Compass bearings guided the direction. By late afternoon, the battalion cleared the immediate battle area. Japanese patrols were reported behind them. Occasional shots rang out. The Australians pressed on silently. That evening, the column halted in dense jungle. No fires were lit. Men ate cold rations if they had any. Guards watched for movement. Exhaustion set in after days of continuous fighting. Radio operators attempted contact throughout the day. The set functioned, but terrain blocked signals. No reply came from brigade or divisional headquarters. The last clear transmission from the 227th was a brief situation report mid-morning. After that, silence. Headquarters recorded the battalion as missing. Potts reported to higher command that the 227th had been cut off during the withdrawal. No further information reached Port Moresby. On 9th of September, the battalion continued southeast through trackless country. Progress was painfully slow. Men sank to their knees in mud. Leeches covered legs and arms. Constant rain soaked everything. Food reserves dwindled rapidly. Most carried only a few days' rations. Foraging began immediately. Soldiers dug for roots. They ate hearts of palms and wild fruit when found. Water came from vines and streams. Japanese search parties moved into the area. Evidence of their presence appeared. Abandoned Australian equipment was later found by enemy troops. Small clashes occurred when patrols met. Cooper maintained discipline. The column stayed together as much as possible. Stragglers were collected. Officers rotated point duties. Decisions were made by map and compass. By 10th of September, sickness spread. Malaria cases increased. Men shivered with fever despite the exertion. Dysentery weakened many. Stretcher cases slowed the pace. No medical evacuation was possible. The terrain grew more difficult. Sharp ridges alternated with deep ravines. Climbing consumed energy. Descents were treacherous. Boots wore out completely. Some men marched barefoot. Leadership became crucial. Cooper and his officers encouraged constantly. NCOs kept sections moving. Mates helped weaker comrades. The battalion's cohesion held despite the strain. Days blurred into one another. No contact with other Australian units. No airdrops reached them. Isolation was complete. The men knew headquarters likely presumed them lost. Japanese forces consolidated on the track. They advanced south toward Minari and Iarabiwa. Reports filtered back of abandoned positions. The main Australian line withdrew further. Inside the jungle, the 227ths pushed on. Small groups occasionally split to scout routes. They rejoined when possible. Rations ran out entirely by mid-September. Starvation set in. Men lost weight rapidly. Uniforms hung loose. Faces grew gaunt. Strength ebbed with each day. Yet they continued. The goal remained to reach friendly lines. On 15th of September, the first signs of hope appeared. Distant gunfire suggested Australian positions ahead. The column adjusted direction. Morale lifted slightly despite physical decline. Japanese patrols remained a threat. One encounter on 17th of September led to a brief firefight. Casualties were taken. Ammunition, already low, decreased further. The Australians evaded pursuit and moved on. By 20th of September, the battalion's effective strength had fallen sharply. Many men could barely walk. Stretcher cases increased. Decisions grew harder. Cooper consulted senior officers daily. Terrain continued to challenge. Dense bamboo thickets blocked paths. Rivers required careful crossing. Rain persisted without break. Nights grew colder at higher altitudes. Last sightings of stragglers reached other units around this time. Papuan carriers reported seeing small groups of Australians moving parallel to the track. These reports offered faint hope at headquarters. On 24th of September, advanced elements of the battalion neared the village of Jarir. Scouts made contact with outposts of the 25th Brigade. Confirmation spread quickly. The lost battalion had survived. The main body arrived on 25th of September. Around 300 men emerged from the jungle. They were emaciated, diseased, and exhausted. Many collapsed upon reaching safety. Medical teams treated them immediately. Headquarters received the news with relief. The 227ths had evaded capture for 17 days. They had marched through some of the most difficult country on earth. Their endurance became legend. Yet the cost was immense. Casualties from fighting, disease, and starvation reduced the battalion to a shadow. It would not fight as a formed unit again on the track. Survivors joined other actions later at Gona and Sanananda. The final hours of isolation raised difficult questions. How had an entire battalion vanished so completely? What decisions shaped their survival? The answers lay in the choices made on 8th of September and in the extraordinary resilience of the men who carried them out. Yet the final hours of the unit still raised difficult questions. The disappearance of the 227th Battalion during the Battle of Mission Ridge Brigade Hill has long fascinated historians. For 17 days in September 1942, an entire battalion vanished from Australian records. No radio contact. No visual sightings. No confirmed casualties reported by the Japanese. Why the unit became isolated remains debated among scholars. The dense terrain of the Owen Stanley Range played a central role. Jungle so thick that visibility rarely exceeded a few yards. Steep ridges and deep gullies fragmented movement. Even experienced troops could lose direction quickly. Historians suggest the initial separation stemmed from confusion during the withdrawal on 8th of September. Official brigade orders reached only parts of the 21st Brigade. The 214th and 2th/16th battalions received instructions to pull back along the main track. Reports vary on whether a similar order reached Lieutenant Colonel Cooper in time. Some accounts indicate that runners carrying withdrawal messages failed to locate the 227th's headquarters. Telephone lines had been cut by shelling. Radio signals faded in the deep valleys. This communication breakdown left Cooper unaware of the planned movement south. One theory proposes that Cooper made an independent decision to avoid the track. Battlefield evidence supports this view. Japanese forces had already established a strong roadblock south of Brigade Hill. A direct withdrawal along the track would have led to heavy casualties or capture. Survivor testimony, recorded in unit war diaries, confirms the deliberate choice to move east into parallel ridges. Cooper aimed to bypass the enemy position. The plan relied on compass navigation and knowledge of the terrain gained from patrols. It succeeded in evading immediate destruction but prolonged the isolation. Reports conflict on the exact route taken. Some veterans described following a series of razorback ridges. Others recalled descending into deep creeks and climbing again. Archival maps show multiple possible paths parallel to the main track. No single route can be confirmed definitively. Another point of debate concerns casualty figures during the initial fighting. Official records list the battalion's strength at around 550 before Mission Ridge. Approximately 300 emerged on 25th of September. Historians differ on how many losses occurred in battle versus the jungle ordeal. Some accounts suggest around 100 killed or missing in the defensive actions from 6 to 8 September. Battlefield recovery after the war located several graves near Mission Ridge. Equipment and personal items were found scattered along the abandoned positions. Other sources emphasize losses from disease and starvation during the invasion. Malaria and dysentery claimed many lives. Men too weak to continue were left with carers in hidden locations. A few were later recovered. Others succumbed in the jungle. One theory proposes that small groups became separated early in the march. Patrols sent to scout ahead or flank sometimes failed to rejoin. Reports from Papuan carriers mentioned sightings of isolated Australian soldiers over several weeks. These may have been detached sections of the 227th. Japanese records, examined after the war, offer limited insight. The South Seas Detachment reported capturing some Australian equipment on Mission Ridge. They claimed no large-scale prisoners from the 21st Brigade at that time. This supports the view that the battalion successfully broke contact. Historians note the absence of Japanese pursuit deep into the eastern jungle. Enemy forces concentrated on the main track advance. Their supply constraints limited wide-ranging patrols. This allowed the 227th's room to maneuver undetected. Some accounts indicate that air observation failed to locate the battalion. Allied aircraft flew regular reconnaissance over the track. Pilots reported no signs of large bodies of troops off the main route. Heavy canopy concealed movement effectively. Reports vary on the role of Papuan assistance during the invasion. Local people occasionally provided food or guidance to stragglers. Loyalty to the Australians was strong in many villages. Yet fear of Japanese reprisals limited open help. No documented large-scale aid reached the main body. One interpretation suggests initial over-optimism at headquarters about the battalion's fate. Early reports assumed the 227th had withdrawn successfully with other units. Only after days of silence did concern grow. Brigadier Potts formally listed them as missing around 12th of September. Archival documents imply differing assessments at higher levels. Some staff officers believed the battalion destroyed. Others held hope based on the terrain's capacity to hide movement. General Blamey received conflicting briefings in Port Moresby. Battlefield forensic evidence gathered post-war clarified parts of the story. Graves registration units located remains along suspected routes. Personal identifications confirmed 227th members. Most deaths appeared due to sickness rather than combat after 8th of September. Survivor interviews conducted in the 1980s added detail. Veterans described leadership decisions under extreme stress. Cooper's choice to avoid the track saved the majority from capture. Yet the physical cost was immense. Historians largely agree the disappearance was not mysterious in origin. It resulted from known factors: terrain, communication failure, enemy encirclement, and deliberate evasion. No evidence supports claims of mass desertion or secret surrender. Some accounts highlight the psychological impact on the wider campaign. News of a lost battalion affected morale among other units. Reinforcements marching north heard rumors. The eventual reemergence restored confidence. Reports differ on whether the battalion could have rejoined sooner. One view suggests earlier westward movement might have linked with the track near Minari. Counter-arguments cite Japanese patrols blocking such routes until late September. Another theory examines the role of exhaustion in decision-making. The battalion had fought continuously since late August. Fatigue impaired judgment. Yet veteran status from Syria helped maintain cohesion longer than might have occurred with less experienced troops. Australian official history, published in 1957, describes the episode as a remarkable feat of endurance. Author Dudley McCarthy based his account on war diaries and interviews. He frames the isolation as unavoidable given the circumstances. Later historians have refined this view. Peter Brune and David Horner incorporated more veteran testimonies. They emphasized the human cost while affirming the strategic necessity of the delaying actions. The debate continues in specialized studies. Military academies examine the episode for lessons in jungle warfare. Communication reliability and off-track movement feature prominently. Some sources question whether better maps or native guides might have shortened the ordeal. Pre-war surveys of the area were incomplete. Local knowledge varied. These remain hypothetical considerations. No credible evidence supports dramatic alternative explanations. Claims of deliberate abandonment or cover-up lack documentation. All available records align on the core facts. The 227th's experience highlights the chaotic nature of the Kokoda fighting. Units could become detached through no fault of command. Survival depended on initiative and endurance. Historians today view the episode as emblematic rather than enigmatic. It illustrates the broader challenges faced by Australian forces in 1942. Terrain and logistics shaped outcomes as much as enemy action. The story endures because it defies simple summary. 17 days lost in the jungle. 300 survivors from over 500. A battalion preserved through skill and suffering. What happened next remains one of the resolved yet still poignant matters of the war. The men themselves carried the answers in their memories and in their silence. The men of the 227th Battalion were ordinary Australians. Farmers from the Adelaide Plains. Clerks from city offices. Young men who left families behind in 1940. They volunteered for service. They trained hard. They fought in Syria. Then they faced the ultimate test on Kokoda. Their story is one of profound human endurance. 17 days lost in the Owen Stanley jungle. No food after the first week. Constant rain. Malaria raging through weakened bodies. Boots disintegrated. Uniforms rotted away. Yet they kept moving. Mates carried mates. Officers shared the same hardships. No one was left behind willingly. Stretcher bearers worked until they themselves collapsed. Small acts of kindness sustained the group. Private John Davis, a signaller from Unley, kept trying the radio every day. He knew the chances were slim. He tried anyway. Hope came in small measures. Corporal Tom Fletcher, a farmer's son, shared his last biscuits with a fevered comrade. Such gestures happened repeatedly. Mateship became more than a word. It became survival. Lieutenant Bill Carey led scouting parties ahead. He navigated by compass and instinct. His decisions kept the column away from Japanese patrols. Calm leadership held panic at bay. The Papuan carriers deserved equal remembrance. Though not with the battalion during the invasion, their earlier work made the defense possible. They carried tons of supplies over impossible tracks. Australians never forgot their loyalty. The Fuzzy Wuzzy Angels earned lasting gratitude. When the survivors emerged on 25th of September, the sight shocked those who met them. Gaunt faces. Sunken eyes. Bodies reduced to skin and bone. Many could barely speak. Medical orderlies worked through the night. Evacuation began immediately. Stretcher cases went first. Walking wounded followed. Recovery took months. Some men never fully regained health. The battalion ceased to exist as a fighting unit on the track. Later, reformed elements fought at Gona and Sanananda. They added to the final victory. But the core group carried the memory of those 17 days forever. Their sacrifice mattered deeply. The delaying actions of the 21st Brigade, including the 227th, bought crucial time. Reinforcements reached the front. The Japanese advance halted at Ayarabiwa. The counteroffensive began soon after. Port Moresby remained secure. Australia's northern gateway stayed in Allied hands. The wider Pacific War shifted. Every day gained on the track contributed to that outcome. The cost was heavy. Over 600 Australians died on the Kokoda track. Thousands more suffered wounds or disease. The 227th's losses reflected that broader toll. Their story stands for all who served there. Today, the Kokoda track draws pilgrims. Australians walk the same path. They seek to understand the hardship. They honor the memory. Villages along the route preserve the history. Local guides share stories passed down. Memorials mark key sites. Isarava features a granite monument. Words inscribed there speak of courage, endurance, mateship, and sacrifice. Visitors pause in silence. The jungle remains unchanged. Steep, wet, unforgiving. Schools teach the campaign. Young people learn of ordinary men achieving extraordinary things. National identity draws strength from such stories. Resilience in adversity defines part of the Australian character. Veterans returned home quietly. Many spoke little of their experiences. The jungle ordeal stayed private. Time passed. Families grew. Yet the bonds formed on Kokoda endured. Reunions brought survivors together. They shared memories over quiet beers. Laughter mixed with reflection. The lost battalion became proud legend among them. Historians continue to study the campaign. Books and documentaries keep the record alive. Accuracy matters. The facts themselves carry power. No exaggeration is needed. Remembrance services mark anniversaries. Wreaths lay at memorials. Bugles sound the last post. Names are read. The 227th features prominently. Their legacy extends beyond Australia. Papua New Guinea shares the history. Joint ceremonies honor both nations' contributions. Friendship grew from shared hardship. Why does this story matter today? It reminds us of duty willingly accepted, of perseverance when hope seems gone, of loyalty to comrades under extreme stress. Modern generations face different challenges, yet the example remains relevant. Courage is timeless. Sacrifice for others still inspires. The men of the 227th did not seek glory. They did their job. They endured. They survived against steep odds. Many paid the ultimate price. Their emergence from the jungle on that September day brought relief and pride. A lost battalion found again. A testament to the human spirit. Australia remembers them. Papua New Guinea remembers them. We tell their story so it will never fade. In the words carved at Isarava, their spirit lives. It lives in remembrance. It lives in gratitude. It lives whenever we honor what they gave. The lost battalion of Kokoda marches on in memory. Ordinary men. Extraordinary legacy.